Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving straight into the meticulous planning and lightning-fast execution behind one of history's most daring military operations. We're going to look at exactly how raw intelligence, unbelievable logistics, and split-second decision-making all came together to pull off something that the rest of the world thought was literally impossible. Just picture this for a second, because the logistical nightmare here is off the charts. How on earth do you rescue over 100 captive citizens who are sitting on a hostile runway 4,000 kilometers away with absolutely zero allied support nearby? Well, to understand the sheer scale of Operation Thunderbolt, we first need to look at how a totally routine passenger flight suddenly morphed into a massive geopolitical crisis. So, it's June 27, 1976. What started as a completely standard Air France flight, AF-139 heading to Paris, was quickly compromised. When the plane made a scheduled stop in Athens, it ran into a catastrophic lapse in airport security. We're talking broken metal detectors, X-ray screens that were just totally ignored. Because of this, 4 individuals easily smuggled guns and grenades on board. Within minutes of taking off again, the plane was violently diverted south towards Libya, and eventually it touched down in Entebbe, Uganda. Imagine being a passenger on that flight. Once the hijackers breached the cockpit, they shoved the co-pilot out of his seat, held a gun right to the captain's head, and the lead hijacker grabbed the microphone. He delivered this chilling announcement. "This plane has been hijacked, and from now on, I am your captain, and this plane will be called Haifa from now on." In just one sentence, the entire course of the plane and the lives of everyone on board shifted into terrifying uncertainty. Now, you might be wondering who was actually behind this. It was actually a coordinated effort between 2 completely distinct groups. You had 2 members from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine External Operations and 2 from the German Revolutionary Cells. And while they had very different primary ideologies, they shared a common, immediate goal. They wanted to force the release of their imprisoned members from jails across the world, primarily in Israel. Things took a deeply unsettling turn upon landing in Entebbe. The hijackers were joined by 3 more associates, and they systematically separated the Israeli and Jewish passengers from the rest of the group. Then they issued their strict demands: the release of 53 prisoners, $5 million, and the brutal ticking clock set for July 1st. If those demands weren't met by the deadline, they promised to kill every single passenger. Meanwhile, back in Israel, the government was facing an agonizing dilemma. The hostages' families were understandably desperate, demanding action, which sparked a fierce debate at the highest levels. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin actually wanted to negotiate to save lives. He knew Uganda was hostile territory and that its president, Idi Amin, was completely unreliable. On the flip side, Defense Minister Shimon strongly pushed for a military strike, arguing that caving to terrorists would make the nation look weak and just invite more hijackings down the line. So, the military planners get to work. Brigadier General Dan presented 3 initial strike options: sending in naval commandos, doing a massive paratrooper drop, or hiding troops in a civilian Trojan horse plane. Honestly, they were all quickly scrapped. Why? They lacked any sort of reliable exit strategy. Plus, that naval option, it totally ignored the fact that Lake Victoria was literally swarming with crocodiles. The other plans just relied way too much on hoping Idi Amin would peacefully let them leave, which was definitely not a safe bet. The planners were kind of flying blind, desperately needing data. And they got it, all thanks to a fatal tactical error by the hijackers. See, the terrorists decided to release the non-Israeli hostages and put them on a flight to Paris. What they didn't anticipate was that Israeli intelligence agents were waiting right there in Paris to debrief those released passengers. This was an absolute intelligence goldmine. They got precise details on weapon locations, guard routines, and the exact physical layout of the holding area. And then, talk about a lucky break. It turned out that an Israeli construction company named Solel Bone had actually built the old Entebbe terminal where the hostages were being held. By reaching out to them, military planners got their hands on the original architectural blueprints. It's like a giant puzzle suddenly coming together. They could map out the entry and exit points, the hallways, the rooms, down to the very last inch. They even built a full physical replica to train on. But here's the thing. Planning a military op of this magnitude takes precious time. To buy that time, Israeli negotiators played along on the diplomatic front. They feigned compliance, saying, "Hey, we're willing to meet your demands. We just need a few more days to gather these prisoners from around the world." This brilliant move secured an extension to July 4th. And crucially, that new deadline perfectly coincided with Ugandan President Idi Amin taking a temporary trip to Mauritius. The political temperature on the ground was lowered just enough. With the deadline extended, the government gave the official green light for the strike. But let's just pause and think about the sheer distance here. 4,000 kilometers. Over 100 commandos had to fly that massive distance completely under the radar, skimming low over the Red Sea and Africa just to reach an enemy country without anyone noticing? It's wild. To pull this off, they relied on 4 heavy-lift C-130 Hercules planes, which are perfect for rough, short airfields. The loadout was incredibly meticulous. Plane 1 carried the main 29-man assault team, led by Yoni Netanyahu. Plane 2 held a quick reaction force to hold off the Ugandan army. Plane 3 was loaded with reserve paratroopers specifically tasked with blowing up enemy fighter jets so they could be chased. And Plane 4? That was essentially a flying hospital and gas station, packing an emergency portable fuel pump. They thought of absolutely everything. Now, for the ground assault, they relied heavily on the element of surprise. When that first plane landed silently in the dark, the commandos didn't just run out on foot. No, they rolled out a perfect replica of Idi Amin's personal motorcade. We're talking a black Mercedes and 2 Land Rovers, right down to the matching flags and fake license plates. The plan was to drive this Trojan convoy straight up to the terminal at exactly 40 kilometers per hour to match Amin's usual speed and just slip right past the guards. But, as we know, even the best-laid plans hit a snag. The commandos brought a black Mercedes. What they didn't know, because how could they, was that Idi Amin had surprisingly switched to a white Mercedes just 2 days prior. At 300 meters out, the Ugandan guards noticed the car color was wrong and raised their weapons. An Israeli commando shot one guard with a silenced weapon. But then, a second commando in the trailing Land Rover fired an unsuppressed shot, a loud bang, and just like that, their stealth advantage was totally gone. With their cover completely blown, it came down to pure, unadulterated speed. The commandos immediately bailed out of the vehicles and sprinted those final 300 meters toward the terminal, all while taking heavy fire from the control tower above. They breached the doors, shouting through megaphones in Hebrew and English for the hostages to stay down, and engaged in rapid, point-blank firefights with the hijackers inside. The chaotic crossfire inside that terminal was over in minutes. It was incredibly swift. All 7 hijackers were killed, along with 45 Ugandan soldiers who engaged the strike force. But this success came at a very heavy cost. Tragically, 3 hostages lost their lives in the confusing crossfire, and the assault team's leader, Yoni Netanyahu, was fatally struck by a bullet from outside. Through it all, though, 102 hostages were successfully rescued. Now, wrap your head around this timeline. 53 minutes. From the exact moment the wheels of that first C-130 touched down on the pitch-dark Entebbe runway to the moment the rescued hostages were loaded up and airborne heading back home, the entire ground operation took just 53 minutes. It's a stunning, almost unbelievable display of velocity in military tactics. And remember, getting the hostages on the plane was only half the battle. They had to survive the 4,000-kilometer trip home. To guarantee they wouldn't be chased, those reserve paratroopers systematically blew up 11 Ugandan MiG fighter jets sitting right there on the tarmac, totally neutralized any threat from the air. The planes then flew to Kenya for a secret refueling stop. Meanwhile, back in Uganda, an enraged and deeply paranoid Idi Amin ended up arresting his very own army chief. While the rescue was heralded worldwide as a logistical miracle, we have to talk about a really grim postscript. There was one tragic exception. An elderly hostage named Dora Block. She wasn't at the terminal during the raid because she had fallen ill earlier in the week and had been moved to a local hospital in the city. Following the successful raid, Idi Amin's forces, deeply humiliated, went to the hospital and murdered her in vengeful retaliation. The legacy of this mission, though, resonated for decades. The operation was actually unofficially renamed Operation Yonatan to honor its fallen commander, Yoni Netanyahu, who became an immense national legend. The profound sympathy and hero status surrounding his sacrifice ultimately played a huge role in shaping Israel's future, helping pave the way for his younger brother, Benjamin Netanyahu, to rise politically and become prime minister years later. So what does this all mean for us today? By transforming ancient construction blueprints and rushed interrogation notes into a lightning-fast military strike, this event is a masterclass in logistics. But it leaves us with a provocative thought. When the stakes are absolute life and death, just how far should a nation go to bring its people home? And are the extreme risks of relying on sheer, untethered speed always worth it? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.